Garff MHK Daphne Caine has certainly not been short of challenges since she took up the reins at the Department of Education. Do you save £3.5 million a year by closing primary schools and other efficiencies, or acknowledge that the backlash from those affected will be too big a political price to pay for a government which struggles to find popularity? As ever in politics, there's always much more to these decisions than the pithy headlines, so Mrs Caine joins me in the studio to explain. You've been chair of the Climate Change Transformation Board since 2021. Are you going to have time to do that alongside of your new ministerial position?
I think it's obvious that having the brief of education, sport and culture, that something's got to give, and I have really enjoyed and value the time working with fantastic climate change transformation team currently based down at DEFA, and it's been really productive working relationships. Obviously we feel and we have flagged up in the report some of the concerns and the risks that perhaps some of the actions that we're not going to make the deadlines that we'd set ourselves in the plan. However, everybody is working flat out. There were additional appointments made, for instance, to assist the farmers with carbon calculation and other things. There's technology that we're making use of, but it's running really as well as it can do with some excellent people there. And I'd probably say that perhaps in the form it's been with me as chair isn't required now, and it's because I'm hoping to stand down. Obviously it's a chief minister appointment, so the format and role of the future climate board will be up to him. But I did flag in my forward, I think in the climate annual report that we've just debated and Tynwald accepted this week, that I'm the outgoing chair and somebody who will lead it in the future. Perhaps we won't need to be in the same format that it was. I suppose you consider it a job well done if I can stand down and don't need to be replaced.
Yeah, okay. One of your last, potentially anyway, last functions will have been to write the foreword of the recent climate change report. One of the themes, there were a few negative themes, it's fair to say, but one of the themes that was mildly critical was that maybe we need to do more to allow the Manx public to understand what the actual harms are likely to be to people, because I think many people are saying, well, climate change, it's even if it does happen, it's probably going to be good for the Isle of Man because it's going to be a bit warmer, so that can't be a bad thing. And the impact that the Isle of Man has globally is so minimal that it's not our problem. There's quite a prevalent view, I think, in the Isle of Man to that effect. I mean, there are others who would agree with Climate Change Transformation Board and others that there's a climate emergency. Do you think that there does need to be more done to educate people, to explain to people what the impact of climate change may or may not be?
Yes, we can always do more. And one thing I gave a plug to actually in my speech was we have had the benefit, members have all been offered a good proportion have taken up the opportunity to undertake climate literacy training. We found a couple of really fantastic, enthusiastic people to take us through the international context and the Isle of Man place and part it plays in the whole climate change agenda, if you like, on a global scale. Yes, we're small, but as Minister Claire Barber explained in Tynwald, even small actions can have a big impact. And aside from that, we know increasingly that it is being driven by businesses, ESG commitments, but also, just as I said, I think in the end of my speech, if it's not human activity that is causing climate change, if we make all these changes for nothing from a climate perspective, we're still looking at reducing our energy bills, improving our heating of homes and the lowering pollution of vehicles on the streets. We've got a whole load of co-benefits that have been well articulated everywhere. And we might do it only because we get all these benefits, better energy security from renewable generation than relying on a gas pipeline and with all the volatility in the future over gas prices. So there are so many positives that, yes, it would be great to get over. But also on a global scale, the tipping point is ever nearer, and we may be too late to keep the global temperature rise to below 2 degrees. And we're already seeing, and sadly, no, we're not going to turn into the Mediterranean with lovely temperatures. I think we heard today from Manx Utilities that the reservoir at Sulby is 99% full and the others are well into the high 90%. We've had an incredibly wet spring. We know that increasing temperatures actually results in a lot more water that comes down one way or another. We know from Garff constituency, Laxey has had a couple or 3 floods in the first part of this century that were once in a century events, and now, people are nervous when the next one is. The DOI, with its flood mitigation work, has had a massive impact, but it's still a couple of things going back to next year because of working in the river. Parts of the top of Minorca still to be looked at. I've got a constituency meeting about this tomorrow. There's concern, and we are seeing the direct impacts of climate change, and it's not necessarily lovely high temperatures. It's rougher weather, more dramatic events more frequently, and it is absolutely the responsible thing to make sure our sea defences are in place, that we have flood mitigations in terms of the drainage across roads, rivers, valleys, all feeding into Laxey Valley and dispersing some of that runoff elsewhere. It is absolutely the right thing to do. It's protecting people and people's homes and this island that we all call home. So more public engagement to widen the understanding of the Isle of Man context, but also our place and responsibility, also from a business perspective, that having more renewable energy is better for attracting businesses here and making the island, step up and take its place in an international perspective.
And I suppose the thing that really convinces individuals is seeing something that's improved their life. Seeing things like that being taken seriously by government, and you cited Laxey, so people in Laxey will see that, but people in other parts of the island will be thinking, well, we're still getting flooded, nothing's being done. Maybe actually seeing real action across the whole of the island, maybe a more focused investment from government on adapting to the likely changes.
Well, I think we have, and certainly from the climate team, we have a peat restoration project that's ongoing, doing fantastic things higher up in the hills, because healthy peat bogs retain water, prevent it running off and then eroding soils and land and becoming ever more forceful when it reaches lower down in the valley. So that's going on. We've also got an amazing blue carbon project going on around our seas. We've got amazing carbon storage potential in the seagrass and the other marine nature reserves. The Isle of Man's quite well served with its 10 marine nature reserves already designated. We are striving and fulfilling the man in the biosphere aims, because we are fortunate enough to have been given that designation, and it's a great thing to work. It's working in harmony with people and the land, and that feeds into climate.
But I suppose people want to see things that directly affect them. So, for example, the Green Living Grant is available. Is it? Well, I don't know. You tell me. Is it sufficient to encourage people to actually make the moves and make the changes? Are we doing enough in that area?
No, and we hope to do more. And certainly, I think the Environment Department under Minister Barber, they've had really good success with the energy efficiency scheme. So the lowest household incomes have been able to benefit from free insulation and other basic measures that make a massive difference to keeping your homes warm and reducing your energy bills. So there's a large number it's visible on the website exactly how much money has gone out, how many people have been assisted. There's also much more we could be doing to assist businesses and business premises to go green, although we do see more of an initiative being taken, particularly by some of the bigger companies in that regard. And yes, definitely, I think we can all agree that the Green Living Grant has had its time. It's paid out over, I think it's over £1.5 million to a large number of people who've benefited from it. But it's under consideration and review so we can have a more targeted, more appropriate scheme, and that will be with DEFRA to roll out when they've completed the work that they need to do to make sure that it is a better scheme to serve the interests of our island, and particularly to deliver help where it is needed to individual people in their homes, and just to improve the fabric of our buildings, which is, as we see from the report, the climate report, it's still our third largest area of emissions. And absolutely, not only would it, reducing those emissions, improve the environment, the pollution in the atmosphere, the emissions generally, but improves individual homes and individual lives. So what's, win-win.
One of the reasons that, I think it's a pretty big reason why you are wanting to step down as chair of the Climate Change Transformation Board is because you are now the Honourable Daphne Caine MHK, Minister for Education. Obviously, you've worked with ministers. You've never been a minister before. Has that come as a bit of a shock to the system? Was there anything that's surprised you about the change from being Daphne Caine MHK to the Honourable Daphne Caine MHK?
No, I think, education has always been a huge interest and passion of mine. It's fundamental to our society that we get the cornerstone of the island of education as it's got to be strong and correct to enable the Isle of Man and future generations to flourish, to achieve potential. And to me, it's, academic attainment is one thing, but actually bringing the enjoyment back to learning, to have a rounded education isn't all just about academic study. It's having that range of sport and culture that the department is usefully also responsible for. And I do think that we've got amazing offerings on the Isle of Man in all those areas, but it's somehow managing to bring that together and have the best policies that best support education for all ages.
But I suppose the question really is about the difference between what you were doing and what you are now doing as a minister. How has your sort of your work life changed now that you've become a minister? Is there anything about that's different or
Yes, this week in particular, I have crammed meetings into lunchtimes, into breakfast afterwards. I think only one evening I was not busy with something that was political related, work related, whether it's department or other things that I do. So yes, it's a full-on calendar. It's not getting the work-life balance right, I suppose. And despite having been appointed as minister for 4 months, I don't feel that I've yet got to grips with a lot of key policy decisions that are coming down the line that we need to face, because we've been looking at the most urgent priority each week to week, and I'm hoping to have time over the summer to reflect.
Firefighting, really, isn't it? Often in ministerial life, you're going from one emergency to another and trying to solve things, and then somehow you've got to fit in the day-to-day management and leadership of education as well.
We are a very reactive department, or responsive, let's say, because the political system we have, we've got the weekly process of members' questions, we've also got the written questions, we've got a large, obviously, number of stakeholders, if you say all the students on the island and all their parents and all the teachers. It's a huge amount of staff within the department. I think it's 2,600 plus. We are a huge department, very people oriented, delivering something for people. So there is a need to be responsive, but it does feel like a treadmill at times that we could just do with taking pause and, instead of being reactive, start to be a bit more proactive and prioritise the things that are for us. And I suppose the funding review is a huge piece of work that was the first big priority that I needed to get my head around and make some pretty clear policy decisions on.
Well, we'll come on to that very shortly, but I suppose to start with, what would, I mean, assuming, ignore the fact that you are now the minister, what was your vision when you were standing for the House of Keys? Did you have a vision for education, and if so, what would you hope to have managed to deliver in your time, just as an MHK, let alone as minister, in terms of the education of the children of the island?
Well, I suppose there's always a risk that you think, back then things were better. But certainly when I had my children, in the noughties, and I suppose around the period that I was engaged with bringing visiting media over to the Bun School, Gaelgach, and having that awareness of all the elements that we offered as a society, it seemed to work better then. There seemed to be more. It seemed a happier place. I think that for me, excellence in education is not only academic attainment, and yes, I do want to see standards go up, but then you've got this whole mix over which exams we're taking, which students fit into which areas, and academic achievement and other, what special needs support we offer, and also mental health support. And it is very clear to me that the school population, if you like, that is the current cohort, is different to how it was when I was at school, even when my children started school 15 years ago. There is something, in society that we have to change and adapt. So the education system, or the education service we provide, has to adapt to meet the needs of the current people on the island, and that's what I want to see. So my vision is absolutely to have excellence in education, but it has to be a more rounded, holistic look than the Victorian school model that we used to have.
So schools need to be a happy place.
Absolutely.
You're listening to Perspective with Education Minister Daphne Caine. You touched briefly on the review into funding of schools on the island, and this was a report commissioned by the Council of Ministers. Council of Ministers was keen to see whether a more efficient model could be delivered, and sure enough, the consultants were paid to come up with a more efficient model, and so they did. As a result, some schools have been described as inefficient. How did you respond initially to that?
As I've said, the absolute message that I want to come out from this is I would not support closing the small schools purely because they have lower numbers. There has to be a look. We're constantly reviewing the offering and what's appropriate in the various locations. But for me, the educational outcomes of individual students is the paramount importance and driving factor for me to look at what we've got. I think it's a bit unfair to keep saying the inefficient schools. They're no more efficient or inefficient than the big schools, except because they have smaller numbers, it is more expensive sometimes to deliver, economies of scale for a smaller school compared with a bigger school. So let's stop saying the inefficient schools. The report, which is very much looking from a UK model, is suggesting that we should only have single form entry or two form entry schools, and therefore, the schools of below 100 pupils are never going to be as efficient as the others. And I'm saying, whoa, look at the education within our island. My own children went to Doon School. We've got excellent schools. There's a few Douglas and Braddon and Ballaugh also on the list, and Foxdale. But what we've got to consider, I suppose, as a department, and we've said, no, we're not going to close schools. And we have to consider the demographic information. It's just been announced that 31 new homes are going to be built at Andreas. Well, I want to be more strategic in how we look at the school estate and the number of pupils, and I think we have to get better at adapting when you've got 300 homes going up at Ballasalla, that we're waiting now on planning permission to put a mobile classroom in a school that is suddenly overrun with new students. So for me, all that has to go into the mix. If there comes a point, of course, if a school went below 50 students or 40 students and the educational outcome and the educational experience of those students was impacted negatively, we would have to take hard decisions, and I would be able to take those decisions, but I don't think you could do it in isolation, just because the way education is delivered to a very much a more rural place of the Isle of Man is different to how it is in larger towns and villages across the water.
Your predecessor, as you will know, has gone on the record and said that actually, she would have closed some, maybe not all of the schools, but would have closed some of the schools. Her argument, and this is an argument that the Chief Minister was rehearsing in Tynwald, in the June Tynwald, was that we need to find more efficient ways of delivering services across government. Chief Minister's assertion is that if we want to continue to have a good, well-funded health service, we can't afford to carry on doing things the way we're doing them. A committee, well, not a committee, a firm of experts have come in and they've made recommendations and they've suggested tough decisions that need to be taken. And your first action as minister is to say, well, actually, we're not going to do that.
That's one of the recommendations in one of the areas that they looked at. I do think this is a great opportunity to take the funding review findings and apply it to how we deliver a better education system on the island, enhancing the quality and efficiencies that we do offer in the education system. But as I explained, I'm not convinced that there would be such huge savings, because what would you do about small children needing to travel several miles to a different school? Then you're increasing your emissions, your the experience of school, and the sort of the community is broken apart, and the value of having a very strong knit community is essential, I would say, to many things that we want to deliver in our island plan, and also for the future of society. So it's a great document to start. It gives us lots of food for thought. It focuses the mind on a few areas where we could go, but the headline from me is, we're not closing schools just because they have small numbers, unless that impacts the educational outcomes of children, and we'll take into consideration a whole load of other factors. And secondly, I do think it's a good time for the department to undertake a review of secondary education, but no secondary staff are likely to be made redundant as a result of that. We are not looking to make redundancies, make efficiencies, redeploy people, better spread our resources across the whole service that the education department delivers.
And as you've suggested there were there were several. I think there were 5 recommendations altogether. So there are 4 others that we haven't touched on yet. Obviously, the headline grabber is 8 schools could potentially have closed. But there are some other elements. And indeed, I know you've already said to me that you embrace those recommendations. One of the ones that should be of big concern, I think, to everyone on the island is this explosion in numbers of children needing additional educational needs, and the children who have complex needs. Is there any indication as to how we've gone from a position where there didn't seem to be that many kids that were in this category to suddenly having an overwhelming number and an inability really to cope with them all?
It's similar to other jurisdictions. Some attribute part of the increase, particularly in mental health issues, to post-COVID. There's also smartphone screen time that has been flagged as a concern. The department is considering all that, but my role, I suppose, in setting the policy is dealing with the current position. And the current position is, yes, we have a very large increase. I think it was up 35% increase in additional education needs. We've also experienced larger numbers of children with English as an additional language that require support, certainly in the initial months of attending a school. And we also we're looking to develop an inclusive education policy. Now, the department previously tried to get funding for additional education needs. And I suppose what this report does for me is highlight how essential it is for us to conduct a more holistic review, look at whether, as the report suggests, we have the specialist provision centres. We already have 10 around the island. We have 5 in primary schools, one at each of the secondary schools. Whether that could be repurposed for more of a general look and a specialist provision centre somewhere. But that would be a significant departure from how we've delivered education in the past.
Currently, all children are accepted into whichever school they're closest to, unlike other education systems, certainly some in the UK, where children with particularly complex needs end up going to specialised units.
Yeah, you could say that nowhere is that far away on the island. Across the centre of the island is a shorter distance than some rural communities spend getting to their education. But it's something that I could see that we would need additional support. We can't just minister with a pen saying, I think we should do that. We need to be very careful that we need to establish exactly what the need is, and then using the report and the recommendations in it, have a project worker working with the schools and the teachers and the parents to consider what is the best option for the future of our island, best to serve the needs of now and the future projections, just again for the best experience of education that young people should and deserve to have in our island in their youth. So, and it's for everybody, but it may not be possible to deliver it as it has been, and it is absolutely on the department, I think, to hopefully get the necessary people in post to project manage such a big piece of work and then to implement it.
And the report recommends something in the region, I think it was £8.9 million is required to fund this. Of course, you famously at the last budget got it was £18 million uplift in the department's budget. So, presumably you've got the money.
Not at all, because a lot of that money was already allocated for staff salaries and the increase that everybody received last year. Also, we've had, as you know, an expansion to the preschool credit. So there is an additional year now, 3-year-olds. 2 to 3-year-olds as well as 3 to 4-year-olds now get a substantial amount of money to support them in preschool nurseries, and we will be what we're looking at now, I think, is a transformation fund but again carefully to work collaboratively both with the school communities and outside to say what is the best system we could put together for our island that may bring some efficiencies, but that isn't the focus as much as ensuring the best possible education serving all of the needs of all the students that we have within it.
And those who work in schools may well suggest that in particularly in smaller schools, the capacity to deal with children with additional educational needs isn't as great as it is in maybe larger schools, contrary to possibly popular opinion, which might think, it's a smaller school, so there'll be more attention given to a particular child. Actually, you need a larger school with more capacity so that the child can get more attention where it's needed.
Absolutely. But that is something that would have to be assessed, I think, as a holistic review of our additional education needs, and within that the specialist provision centre offering how that is best set to meet the needs of the current and projected future need.
Another of the recommendations, it's not quite written in this way, but paraphrasing, is you've given far too much administrative responsibility to head teachers, and you need to take some of that responsibility back. Obviously, that involves the dreaded middle management being increased. Is that something that the department supports?
I think there's always efficiencies. If you pile more and more administrative tasks on 32 primaries as well as the 5 secondaries, then the teacher time available to the head teacher becomes perhaps too much spending on administration, and the department identifies that the HR function, for instance, could perhaps be better supported from the centre. But again, that would require resource, that would require some assistance. There's also some thought around whether the secondary school in an area could support their feeder schools more with some of the functions. And again, it's a great starting point to have this report, but we need to establish what's best for the next 10 years, 20 years, generations of students, and to free up some of that teacher time, not to have to spend on, I suppose, the annoying admin that then replicated for 32 schools to recruit a teacher. Well, that potentially there's efficiencies to be made and greater fairness if that was to be centralised. But this is all something that needs to be carefully worked out and developed in collaboration with the schools and the teachers in charge of them.
I don't think you'd find much opposition from head teachers if you suggested to them tomorrow that their administrative burden was to be reduced and they could get back to what they're good at, which is teaching or supporting the education of children.
Let's hope so. I shall certainly be interested to hear directly from teachers on those points, and that's why this is, while it's a policy discussion for the department to have and to discuss with Treasury how we fund project officers to take this forward, it has to be done in collaboration with the education professionals.
And the other thing that you mentioned earlier was the other recommendation was in relation to what was perceived to be 50 teachers too many in the secondary education field or something in that region. And this was based on a calculation that the experts had of teaching time should be about 80% of the staff time. 20% of their time should be spent on lesson preparation and marking and the like. 80% should be actually spent teaching children directly. And based on that calculation, they reckoned that you had 50 teachers too many. Have they got a point?
Again, I think on that point, we need to go away, study it, get better information, and also put it into an Isle of Man context. This was done very much from a perspective of a UK delivery of education. So absolutely not thinking that we're making any teachers redundant on the back of this. We have to understand how we can better accommodate, I suppose, other ways of learning, whether that's the use of AI, whether that's the use of online. We need to understand the number of students on reduced timetable. We've got a virtual head teacher. How we best reuse, repurpose what we have in the educational offering for the students of the future and deliver education in a way that's best for them to learn. So we very firmly say, I think that was the fifth area of the recommendation from the report, that the pace of change in society is something, and it's another great opportunity. It's probably overdue that we look at how we deliver that education. They had the formula, I think. QE2 High School was actually the nearest to the correct, efficient number of teachers, but it's how do we ensure a harmonisation and equality of offering to all students on the island? What's the best way to provision the curriculum, which exams we take, and how that is taught and how students, and then most significantly at this time, how we incorporate the use of AI into how we run the schools, because it's coming across, artificial intelligence is coming to every part of life, and that there's some great opportunities there, but it's how we best adapt and use all the available technology to support the needs of students and teachers.
Tucked away in the very back, in one of the appendices of the report, was quite an interesting little table which demonstrated that Jersey and Guernsey were spending something in the region of £10,500 per pupil. I think England was £7,500, Wales was £6,500, and the Isle of Man, bottom of the table, with only £5,500 per pupil. Now, some of that can be in the way in which these things are reported, and it may be that you're not comparing apples with apples, as the phrase goes. But a £5,000 difference between the Isle of Man and the Channel Islands per pupil, that does seem like a big difference in money spent.
It does. It's really important, before we go running with that we understand the context for how each of those figures was calculated. I understand that officers in my department are liaising with their counterparts, certainly in the Channel Islands. So perhaps we'll be able to drill down a bit and fully understand, because that was very much an add-on, and perhaps wasn't as robust in its research as the rest of the report. But I'd also say that, you know, these parliamentary trips that everybody likes to criticise, fortunately, on 2 occasions when I've been to Jersey, I have met counterparts, and also was talking with Sam Mezek on a recent parliamentary trip, who's another officer. I was staggered to learn that in Jersey, the government funds every student at private school to the amount, whether that's 60-something% of the private fees, and the parents just top up. So in Jersey, it's something like 45% of kids are at these private schools, but the government's supporting them, which I think is a very strange model. And I look forward to talking to my counterpart in Jersey, who fortunately I met before, and I think once things calm down, probably after the end of term, it would be great to have a discussion about how we're delivering education in our 2 islands and to better understand the funding. But I would say I'm taking that with a pinch of salt. And isn't it amazing that our students are effectively on 50% of the funding per pupil compared with the Channel Islands, and yet we're still saying we're inefficient when we're delivering in these small schools? Well, maybe the averaging out, it's not that inefficient. And I think for me, the economies of scale, it's the number of students, and I suppose it's the balance of students within the year. But absolutely fundamental to everything, what we've got to keep focused on is the excellence in education, and, as you said, the enjoyment of education, that we deliver a holistic education service to suit the needs of everybody in our community.
Finally then, you had a nothing to see here, move along please, motion on the order paper, and that was in relation to regional sports hubs. It didn't quite go the way that you had planned, in as much as I think it was the Speaker amended the motion to say, actually, we're not going to let you off the hook, and we want some clarity on what you're going to deliver for particularly for Castle Rushen and the south. Were you surprised at all by anything that was said in the debate? I suppose what was it that you were trying to convince Tynwald members to support?
No, I'm very grateful for Mr. Speaker for having a discussion with me in advance of the sitting, and I was very comfortable to support his amendment. It acknowledged the petition of Mrs. Katz and the community support for the pool. It also gave me the opportunity to give clarification over the funding figures, to say that yes, the subvention has been pledged, that we will continue to fund the regional pools, barring any catastrophic event that could potentially spell closure for Castletown, given that its age. excuse me, and but there is an additional pot of funding that we have, should it be required.
So, I mean, we those of us in the south who have had involvement from time to time with the management of the pool know that the pool. Well, I know because my dad was one of the original board members of the Southern Swimming Pool, I think. The pool has been around for a very, very long time, and it's often compared with the Western and the Northern Pool, which are much more successful. But of course, they are more recently built buildings. They're built with more energy efficient systems. They have larger cafe areas, which allows them to make money. The proposals for a future hub or future Castle Rushen High School, a sports block is mentioned, and there's a pool in there. Some of the concern that I've heard expressed, particularly in the south of the island, is that perhaps this will become a Department of Education building and a Department of Education run pool, which will then mean that there will be less access to the public to that. Is that well, I don't know. How far have you developed plans for a southern pool?
No, we haven't. And that was one of the issues highlighted in the debate, and that Mr. Speaker asked. He asked us both to acknowledge, which I did, the department had not progressed funding and operating formal sport hubs. That was initially on the paper, because the costing of the pools alone meant the department knew that they would struggle to fund those, and there was no additional funding likely to come to expand the sporting facilities. I mean, I've said before, with Ramsey Pool, the lovely bit space behind it would be fantastic to have an ice skating rink with the contraflow between the ice needed and the cooling, and then to the heating for the pool. But I don't think it's going to happen. And there are many different, listed huge numbers, given the size of the island, of sporting clubs running different sporting facilities that are mainly based around the regional areas. So there's no thought to have formal sporting hubs expanded, but in terms of the plans for Castle Rushen High School, phase 1 is the design and build of the school. The sporting facility and the land is on the plan. That is where the pool is planned to go. The design of that has not even reached concept stage, and when that's in discussion, we have undertaken that of course we will involve and collaborate with all necessary stakeholders, but that's a long way ahead. And at the minute we've got the budget for designing the school, and that has to be the priority.
People in the east of the island, as you know, don't pay anything towards what they describe as the national pool. And they say that loads of people from the north, south and west use the national pool, therefore why should they be paying for it? But there is a discrepancy there, isn't there, that the rest of the Isle of Man pays. It's not a huge amount, but they pay a certain amount in rates to support their regional pools, but the centre doesn't pay anything. Is that a discrepancy that perhaps could be changed to allow for more funding to be made available?
Well, the rates isn't really a matter for the department, and there was a few mentions.
You say it's not a matter for the department, but you are now a member of the Council of Ministers, and you are in a position to argue various cases. It
has been mentioned. There was a written question from Mr. Speaker that spelt out what the 2.5p rate would bring in if every local authority applied it, and if it was the 6p rate. And I think at the 6p rate, it would cover the cost of all the regional pools. But historically, Douglas Council would say they gifted the land that the National Sports Centre is built on, and the deal was they wouldn't have to contribute. Now, roll on 30 years, it was interesting, a recent meeting where all-island rate and rates were discussed. There were 4 Douglas councillors strongly defending that position, and there was a large number of other people in the room saying, but we are one society and people should put into an all-island rate, stroke leisure rate. And I think, speaking as an individual politician, an individual citizen as well of the Isle of Man, I benefit from, and over the years my children, from going to the Murrick Park and also to Onken Park, and I can see the argument that we should fund all the benefits of all our leisure offering more fairly. But we'll see what comes forward, because it's a legitimate issue to be debated, and I, as a member of the Mackled ward within Garff, contribute towards Ramsey Pool. The other wards I don't think do, and obviously Onken, Douglas, Braddon haven't done traditionally.
And of course those are the richest local authorities in the island.
But they have substantially different rates. I think we should always look for fairness, and I remember how terribly unpopular the toilet tax was when there was this flat charge. But I've long wondered whether there is something that says we all benefit from the water and sewerage services that we have to the property. My rates are slightly discounted because we have a septic tank, so we have an additional £150, I think it is, it might have gone up, to empty the septic tank periodically, and that is reduced from the rates. But actually, we don't want people not to do that when it's necessary. Could there be an argument that the water and sewerage rate should be divided equally between the householders, because everybody receives that, rather than being calculated on the rateable value, which then skews it quite widely for different places? But I haven't discussed it in the Council of Ministers, haven't really had it raised as an issue across Garff, and obviously as Mackled ward was the lowest rated parish when the three came together, we've been on a stepping up by 10%. I think hopefully we're probably on a par now, but I'm very aware that rates, there is an imbalance across the island. And also in the recent Ramsey boundary inquiry, the inspector running the inquiry has made that very point, that actually fairness over rates could or should be something for the island to look at in the future. It'll be interesting to see whether the community and political colleagues take that up.
Are you regretting accepting the Chief Minister's challenge to become Education Minister, or
No,
are you delighted by it?
Absolutely not. I'm relishing the opportunity to have an input into improving the education system on the island, and that's what I want to do. I want to have better educational outcomes for everyone, and it is a wonderful opportunity that I'm very grateful for, to be able to play a part in that.
And then finally, then, as Minister for Education, if you've got till the next election, what do you hope to have achieved?
I hope we'll be able to undertake the significant pieces of project work that come off the back of both this report and also the COVID review. Had some key pieces. There's a little bit of overlap actually with what this report, the PAG report, the funding reviews, identified. So I would like to be able to see that work start and see the implementation at the other side that makes a better education system for everybody on the island, including the special needs, specialist provision centres, whatever that looks like for the future. And I'd absolutely like to think that communities will be stronger around their individual schools, around their individual sports facilities, but also as a whole, feeling that we are, there's an equality of offering across the island for everybody. And I don't see any reason why the Isle of Man shouldn't achieve that sort of excellence in education flagship, back to the days that I remember working in tourism, where we had a constant stream of journalists flying over to look at Bunschool Gaelgach and its amazing reputation in what it delivers, both in terms of keeping Manx Gaelic alive, but also in the academic achievements outside of the language skills for those students. So I think there's a lot of different strings that we need to pull together and make sure that we have a really strong foundation to build a better education system for the future, but building on the good things that we already have.
That was Education Minister Daphne Caine. So what do you think? I suspect few people would want to see schools closed and teachers made redundant, But how will government ever become more efficient if these difficult decisions are ducked? The Chief Minister told Tynwald he's looking for efficiencies across government. So is the school closure rejection an opportunity missed, or a sensible rejection of a foolhardy idea? Don't forget this programme is available as a podcast on Manx Radio's website. For now though, I'm Phil Gorn. Got a Mayo son Geistachrom. Thanks for listening.